Hello, welcome everyone to our live stream this evening. My name is Casey Darling Niffen. I am the Conservation Policy Director with the Florida Wildlife Federation, and we're so happy that you've joined us tonight. The Florida Wildlife Federation's mission is to safeguard Florida's water, wildlife, and wild spaces by taking action today to prevent irreversible loss tomorrow. And we are so honored this evening to be joined by two experts who will talk to us about invasive species in Florida. With us tonight, we have Donna Kalil. Donna is a python elimination specialist with the South Florida Water Management District. Her passion as a herper and love for wildlife led her to this full-time position, removing pythons in South Florida. She leads the Everglades Avengers team in the annual Python Challenge and has caught more than 1,000 pythons in the last decade. And also with us, we have Dr. Steve Johnson. Steve is a certified wildlife biologist, a tenured faculty member in the University of Florida Department of Wildlife Ecology and Conservation, and current interim chair of the department. His area of expertise is natural history and conservation of amphibians and reptiles, and he has worked extensively with imperiled species. Tonight, these experts will share the serious challenges we're facing with invasive species in Florida and the collaborative, science-driven efforts to tackle this scary problem. So if you've been on our live streams before, you know at the end of the discussion tonight, we'll have a question and answer with our audience. Please drop your questions and your comments into the chat as we're talking, and we will be happy to answer them at the end of this wonderful conversation. So settle in, let's get into some of the frightening impacts invasive species can have on Florida's habitat. So as we know, we are gathering tonight on the eve of Halloween. I hope everyone has their spooky costumes ready for tomorrow. And so let's start with kind of a fun question for Steve and Donna. If you were to make a scary movie, we've probably all been watching them all month, about the threat of invasive species in Florida, what would it be about? Which invasive species have the scariest impact, and what habitats are they invading? And really, what would make them even more frightening, in your opinion?
Who wants to go first?
Go for it, Donna.
Go for it, Donna.
Well, I'd say the Burmese python, being that it is a monster snake, 18 feet long, and they're actually a beautiful animal, but they just don't belong in the Everglades, and they're wreaking havoc out there. And, what makes it scarier? We don't have to imagine it's happening. They are coming into our yards and our neighborhoods looking for more animals. And if you keep your pets outside, you have to be careful. You have to be careful that they will try to get them. So it's real. That's the scariest part about this, is that it's real. They've devastated the environment. And the only thing that would make it worse would be if they were radioactive from Turkey Point blowing up back in the 90s, when they got established here, and or maybe if they were venomous or something like that. But otherwise, they're pretty darn scary as they are.
I was going to say if they were on a plane, but that scary movie's already been made, unfortunately.
There you go.
Steve, how about you?
All right. Well, I'll just preface this. You're going to have a bias from me. I'm a vertebrate guy. I study vertebrates, animals with backbones, right? And I study amphibians and reptiles. So this is going to be very, like a herp-centric thing, given it's me and Donna on here. But I'd say given the number of invasive species of amphibians, reptiles, even birds, mammals, and then plants and invertebrates, insects, I can't even imagine a movie with all of those actors in it. It's just incredibly frightening. And even though I'm a vertebrate guy, the one thing I think is the most frightening, if I could snap my fingers and get rid of one invasive species in Florida and the Southeast, it would be the red imported fire ant, Solenopsis invicta. They invade all kinds of habitats, yards, natural fields, cultivated fields, a variety of native habitats. If the area where they're living in floods, they'll float to the surface and latch onto the other and and form a floating mat, which is just crazy. These, tens of thousands or more writhing ants together in these little islands floating around. And yeah, I would get rid of them. They'd probably be the star of my scary movie. I think the only thing to make them scarier if they were the size of chihuahuas. If they weren't the size of ants, that would be, we would all be in trouble then.
And there we have it, the smallest to the largest, right? There and everything in between.
I hope someone in Hollywood is watching tonight, because that is absolutely a terrifying movie. And I have a formative memory growing up of a flood in my neighborhood and those mounds of fire ants passing us by. So absolutely terrifying, especially if you have, an ant allergy or something scary like that. So thank you for highlighting just exactly what's at stake here and the impacts on our Florida ecosystems. If you out there in the audience, if you have a scary movie idea, please drop it in the chat for us. We'd love to hear those as well. So now that we've set the scene, let's seriously talk about the impacts that these species are having. Donna, can you just give us some background? Can you tell us how you became a python elimination specialist?
Yeah, well, I've been catching snakes and out in the wild my whole life. And, I love snakes. I love all animals. I grew up down here. I used to go out in the Everglades pretty much every other weekend. The other weekends I was out in the ocean. So I was always outside, enjoying nature. And when I found out, actually, I guess I've been following this since, back in the 80s and 90s. And I found out that it was a severe problem in 2005 when there was a picture of a giant python that pretty much exploded, and a big alligator came out of its stomach. So, when I realized that these giant snakes are out there eating alligators, I just realized there was an issue, and I knew that I could do something about it, because I know how to catch snakes since I was a kid, and I wanted the adventure. I wanted to get out there and try to help the environment as best as I could, and so that's when I started. I didn't find one until 10 years later, and since then I've caught over 1,200 actually to date. As you know, I work for South Florida Water Management District, and that gives me access to areas where they are. But I've also gone into people's yards when people call, and gone in there and caught them out of people's yards. So, I know that there's a need, and I know that I can help with that need. So that's how I did it.
Yeah, what a wonderful way to use something that you enjoy to help our ecosystems, and what a gift that is. So thank you for all the work that you do. And Steve, how did you become involved in invasive species research?
All right. Well, first, anytime I want to talk about invasive species, I got to throw out a definition. So some of your viewers may be aware of this, but you might hear me use the term introduced as well as invasive. So if I mention that some species is introduced, it means it is outside of its native range. It's been introduced by people, either directly or indirectly, into a new area where it did not naturally occur. Many of those introduced species stayed where they're put. Like, let's say it's a cultivated plant you buy at Lowe's, and you introduce it to your yard, and it stays put and it doesn't do anything. It's introduced. There's no impacts implied. For something, when you hear me use the term invasive, I mean an introduced species, so one that is brought to somewhere by the actions of people, directly or indirectly, and then it has one or more impacts. It might have negative impacts on the economy. All right, it might cost for management or control. It might have negative impacts on human quality of life. Like if you step in a fire ant mound and you get stung, that's negatively impacts your quality of life. Or for probably what we're talking about mostly today, it has negative impacts on the ecology. So Burmese pythons being predators of native species, same thing with Mike's sort of claim to fame Cuban tree frog being a predator on a lot of our native tree frogs. And Cuban tree frogs is how I got started. I was working for the U.S. Geological Survey. I'm also from Florida. I grew up in Orlando. Got my PhD here at UF. I was working for the USGS as an amphibian biologist for their amphibian and research monitoring program. And colleagues at UF were emailing me with photos to identify And initially, I think that's a Cuban tree frog. I had to do my own research, and they were sending me more and more images. And after I left USGS, I was fortunate enough to get a job at the University of Florida. And it was those initial Cuban tree frog images that got me interested in that species that's definitely invasive. It harms the economy, human quality of life, and the natural environment. And it just followed from there. So Cuban tree frogs are kind of my claim to fame, but they were sort of my gateway invasive species, if you will, to learning more about a lot of other ones, mainly vertebrates, and teaching about them in my classes, and then collaborating with students to write our outreach publication. So it all started with a couple Cuban tree frog pictures, though.
Awesome. Yeah, and you touched on it a little bit, Steve, but I'd love to hear from both of you. What are in your opinion, some of the most significant ways that these invasive species that we're dealing with in Florida are impacting our ecosystems and our native wildlife? You mentioned the native tree frogs, Steve, and just want to hear a little bit more about those impacts specifically.
Yeah, so specifically with Cuban tree frogs, they're predators on native tree frogs. So I hate to say it, but I haven't gotten an email from someone in Central and South Florida in years with they think it's a Cuban tree frog and it's actually a native species. It's just pretty much they've displaced and replaced by predation, I think, is the primary mechanism. They just eat, they invade an area, they do really well around human habitation, and they've just been significant predators on native tree frogs. They'll also eat some other native species. There might be some competition going on there as well, but the data that I'm most familiar with tend to shows, hey, we can argue from a scientific standpoint there's an impact from predation. They don't really modify habitats too much, unlike something like, let's say, a feral pig. They were introduced by the Spaniards hundreds of years ago. They have some major habitat impacts, from their rooting activities. And then let's see some other ones to think about. Oh, one of the worst ones, and I won't go into it too much, is also from a predatory standpoint, is feral and outdoor cats. So even your pet cats that you let roam outdoors, there's a study that came out maybe 10 years or so ago from the Smithsonian Institute, estimating that outdoor free-ranging cats, feral cats, but also pet cats that are allowed to roam outdoors, kill an estimated 1 to 4 billion birds and an estimated 6 to 22 billion, this is with a B, small mammals in the United States each year. And there's staggering numbers like that for other groups of organisms and other places like Australia. And, feral cats are implicated. So people often don't think as maybe their pet cat being or a cat being invasive, but it can be. So predation, the pig with habitat modification is one. And then sometimes they're vectors for disease, like the pythons that Donna studies. They've brought in a non-native parasite that's impacting our native snake population. So invasive species can impact, natural ecosystems in a variety of ways, for sure.
Yeah. Donna, you work with a little larger species, so the native wildlife that can be impacted might be larger as well. Can you speak a little bit about the impacts of pythons on our ecosystems and wildlife?
Sure. Yeah, as I said, I grew up down here, and I would take trips down into the Everglades all the time, and I couldn't count as many rabbits as I'd see going down the road. On a weekly basis, there were hundreds of them, and raccoons and possums and all sorts of animals down there. And I survey there now every all year long, and I've seen one raccoon, and it was at the entrance of the park. So I'm debating as to whether or not that really was there, or somebody dropped it there from their yard or something. And only about 3 possums. So there are no rabbits left. The studies say that there's less than 1% of fur-bearing mammals down there in Everglades National Park. And obviously they've gone further than that. I'm catching them up in West Palm Beach now. So, I basically see the damage that they do. If I go into an area and I see a rabbit, it's like, oh, well, the pythons aren't there yet. I kind of judge by where the pythons are by what animals are not there. And a lot of people think, well, there's no more mammals down there, no more animals down there, so they're going to starve out. but that's not true because there's still birds and alligators and rats, and that's their main diet is rats, birds, and alligators now. And when they get big enough, deer. I've caught several pythons big enough to and they had deer in their stomachs. So yeah, they're wreaking havoc on our native wildlife. And even when we bring up cats, a lot of people say there's feral cats out in the Everglades. It's like, I know there's not. I've seen them, and I kind of try to catch them, and I've saved many pet cats that were dropped out there. But there are many feral cats that are out there for about a week or two. So you will see a lot of cats out there, but they will not last longer than a couple of weeks. There's only been 2 that I know of that have lasted longer than 6 months. And then they either get eaten by a alligator or a python or, succumb. So, letting feral cats out, letting your cats outside from your home, that's not the thing to do. And dropping them in the Everglades is not the thing to do. Down here in the Everglades, they're not going to survive, but up north they will. And they, they will breed up there and they will wreak havoc. So, I'm getting off topic from the pythons, but, they are doing severe damage. They have done severe damage, and we have to, just continue trying to remove as many as possible to lower their numbers.
Yeah, responsible pet ownership is something I want people to take home from this.
Yeah.
Keeping your pets indoors, cats or dogs, not letting them run free, but also being responsible if you have an exotic pet that you no longer want to or can care for. Just taking it down to the Everglades or naturally and dumping it, which a number of people do. It's against the law. It's unethical, and you don't want to be doing that. So
yeah.
And
yeah.
Donna, I would like to follow up on that. I remember when I grew up in Orlando, I had family friends, and they took me down to the Keys, to Lower Matacumbe Key, when I was like 8 years old. This is like 50 years ago. And I remember going down 75, and you'll notice I'm chatty, and I must have been a chatty kid because we're driving along Alligator Alley, and I think they wanted to shut me up. So they said, Stevie, start counting the rabbits, the marsh rabbits. And I remember doing that, and there were lots of them. That wouldn't work to keep a chatty kid quiet now. As you say, there's been enough research that has, I think, pretty much proven without much of a shadow of a doubt that the pythons are responsible for the decline of mesomammals. A faculty member here in my department named Bob McCleary, he's done a lot of research on pythons, and you might have seen in the news this, robo bunny, this sort of, animatronic AI bunny that's to try to get to a lure to attract pythons to remove them. He's doing that research, but he had a grad student that they went to an area where there are no pythons, and they caught a bunch of marsh rabbits, and they outfitted them with radio collars so they could track them. Half of them took them to another area where there were no pythons to act as a control, right? So, and they expected them to survive there, and they did quite well. And then they took that other group and they took them down into South Florida, down near the southern, road down very south in the Everglades, near the epicenter where they thought the pythons started, and they released them. And they did quite well initially. But as soon as it started getting warm enough for the pythons to start getting active, the student was no longer tracking rabbits. She was tracking pythons because they had eaten the rabbits. So yeah, that's really a sad story that you had to say that you just don't see any, native mammals down there anymore. And it's because of pet pythons that were brought here for the pet trade and ultimately got released from one way or another and got established. So it's a sad story, and hopefully we learn from our history and we don't allow that to be repeated.
Well, I hope so, but unfortunately, I had a pet python, ball python, that I found dropped right at Shark Valley, right at the entrance of Shark Valley, and dropped right in the middle of the road. And they were driving out as I was driving in, and I see this thing, and it's like, well, now it's my pet, but it's not going to survive out there. They only get to be about 5-6 feet, and this Benny, he didn't know how to catch a rat. He would eat the pinkies, the dead frozen ones. So he didn't even know how to catch a rat, yet alone survive out in the wild. So if you think you're doing your pet snake or a pet lizard a favor by letting him go out in the wild, you're not, and you're also possibly bringing in parasites and whatnot that will damage the ecosystem too. So yeah, pet ownership is an important thing. You have to be responsible, and don't ever don't ever let them go out in the wild. And there is the pet amnesty days that FWC has, and contact them, and they'll find a new home for it. So please do that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, there's so many people out there who would love to have a new pet, right? There's so many people with a love of snakes and other pets that maybe if you can't care for them, someone can. So
Yep.
connect with those groups and definitely, be a responsible pet owner, even if you are done being a pet owner.
Right.
I think we touched on it, but is there any newer species that either of you are concerned about? Any new invasives that have kind of come into the Florida ecosystems recently that you want to touch on?
Let me quickly say invasive Asian eels. They're really taking over out there. I have been seeing them for a few years already, but apparently their main food is crayfish, and the crayfish is a food source for so many other animals. And if they're all gone, all of these other animals are basically, our native animals are going to starve because they don't have a food source. So unfortunately those were brought in, I believe, for food reasons, not the pet trade. And I don't know what is going to be done or what can be done to remove them, because they're in the water. We might have to have some kind of things like lionfish hunts or something, maybe something along that line. But yeah, they're prolific, and they're spreading. I don't think they're going to be just for South Florida. I believe that they're going to expand their range even farther afield. So that's a scary one.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a new one for me. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
To follow up on that, something that looks like an eel, but it's an amphibian. So there are three major extant lineages or groups of amphibians. There are salamanders, which probably a lot of people are familiar with. There are frogs, which everyone is familiar with. And there's also this other group that's the least species rich of all of our modern amphibians, called Sicilians. They're sort of eel-like. They're segmented. They almost look like large earthworms. Well, South Florida, around the C4 canal system in very extreme southeast Florida, there is the world's only known introduced and established population of a Sicilian that would have been in the pet trade. Someone probably dumped them, like Donna was saying. I think I'm doing, I want to get rid of my pet. I'll do it a favor. Well, in this case, they survived and they didn't die, unfortunately. But they've become established, and there are a lot of them, and they probably are in the Everglades, or if not, they're likely to get there. I know the state is trying to take action, but usually by the time you sort of notice some numbers of something invasive, it's already past the point of being able to really do much but try to contain it. So I'm kind of concerned what's going to happen with them. Also, from a reptile standpoint, hopefully this won't come to fruition, but this Argentine black and white tegu, the state has now put some much stronger restrictions on them, as have other states in the southeastern U.S. But this is they can make good pets. They're very attractive. They get big, but the issue within them, unlike Burmese pythons, when it becomes really cold, my understanding is they will come to the surface to bask to try to warm up, and they can succumb to the cold. They'll freeze. These tegus, Argentine black and white tegus, even in South Florida when it's warm, during the fall of the year, they go sort of underground into brumation. It's a type of hibernation, and they become inactive. That pre-adapts them to do well in really cooler areas. So that's going to allow them to expand their range outside of Florida. And there's even been some records. I don't know if it's still an extant population, but there were some records from Georgia. There was a semi-captive population at Auburn, at the University of Auburn in Alabama. And a lot of the animals survived a very intense freeze. So those animals kind of scare me, but hopefully the regulations the state has put into place is going to prevent that from getting any worse. But there's several groups of them, and they're all from the pet trade. And then the ones that always scare me are the ones that aren't here yet. The ones that we just don't know about or haven't gotten here. So again, we gotta prevent we have to learn from things like the Burmese python situation and not repeat that, or we're going to suffer the consequences, and so will the environment.
Yeah. The black and white tegus are FWC is going after them because they're in areas where the American crocodile lives, and they are egg eaters.
Yep.
So it's intense down there trying to remove them. Thankfully, I haven't seen many, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. But anytime I do, I remove those as well. So Yeah. Yeah. It's a scary one.
Tegues are one that I've been hearing about here in South Florida as well. So I expected that one to come up. And, that's kind of the purpose of tonight's conversation, right? Is to prevent any of those new species from infiltrating some of these ecosystems. So
Another thing
thank
I don't know if it'll come up is people are the early detection, rapid response is the term we use for if you can detect something early, maybe you can respond rapidly enough to either eradicate it, that's always a huge challenge, or maybe stop a little incipient population. You think like of a fire burning, a wildfire, forest fire, embers float up in there and they move a distance and they drop and they start little spot fires, little incipient fires. Well, keeping an eye out for, something like, oh, all of a sudden I'm seeing a lizard around my, local park that I've never noticed before. Reporting that on iNaturalist or contacting the state FWC and letting them know. So being the eyes and ears so that early detection, and just being aware of that kind of thing. That's something that everyone in the public can do, And if you go to a place often enough, you're going to realize when something's not out of place. So like we say with other things, with invasive species, see something, say something, I guess is appropriate here.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And using iNaturalist is a great way. So, speaking about responses, Donna, can you share a little bit more about the Python elimination program that you participate in?
So the Python elimination program started back in March of 2017 with 25 contractors, I being the first woman to be a part of that. We have 50 with South Florida Water Management District and another 50 with FWC. So there's about 100 contractors out there searching everywhere from the Florida Keys up to West Palm Beach, from Miami, Fort Lauderdale, across to Naples, and they're everything in between. Basically, the lands are vast, and we do get them everywhere from in a car, walking, airboats, basically, every way we can. And our programs together combined, I think have removed over 15,000, which is a good start. It's not something that we're going to say, hey, we got them all. But it's going to be something that we have to continue to do on a regular basis. And I will give you a little bit of hope that there are some places where we've been hunting for the past, since 2017, that they aren't showing up as much. So we are making a difference, and there are some animals coming back in certain areas. So I believe that the pressure that we're putting on that one specific species can lower their numbers enough to help our native wildlife survive. So that's what we're going to continue to do.
Yeah, thank you so much for your work. And Steve, what does current research tell us about some of the most effective ways that we can address invasive species? We've touched on a couple points, but is there any research-based methods?
Yeah, well, things that people are working on, it's how to build a better mouse trap, how to build a better lizard trap or a snake trap, like trapping for tegus. It takes a lot of time and effort. People have to go out and rebait, or if an opossum gets into a trap, like if they're trapping up in Central Florida where the pythons haven't eaten all the opossums, when a possum trips the trap, it's got to go out there and release it. So trying to use artificial intelligence for detecting, when to trigger a trap or be able to reset a trap remotely. There's work with, genetic mechanisms, gene drive, so-called, gene drive to possibly for, like small invasive rodents on islands. That would, I think my understanding is it prevents the animals from being able to reproduce. So there's a lot of research going on. But the most effective is prevention, not letting them get there in the first place. And we know better now. I mean, a lot of these rodents on islands historically have got there because, seafaring peoples were traveling around, and rats and mice, black rats and house mice they go part and parcel with people, and they were on boats and they were getting inadvertently, distributed around the world. But now we know from too many examples that exotic pets being able to being imported to Florida and then escaping or being intentionally released by people thinking they're doing their animal good, which they aren't, as Donna was talking about. Or even there's a number of instances where unscrupulous pet dealers are known to have released non-native species with the hope that they establish a population so they can go out and then remove those animals to sell them in the pet trade. So preventing that next, species from getting here, that is the most effective. It's the most cost effective, and it's the best way to do it. So that's where, I know the state has been working to head, and that's the direction we need to keep going, is preventing the next Cuban tree frog if we can, preventing the next Burmese python or Argentine black and white tegu. That's the most effective. But there's a lot of all kinds of other, research that's going on, ways to detect like environmental eDNA, to be able to take a water sample and, hey, are pythons in, let's say, in Lake Apopka? Well, Donna can tell you, pythons, she's good at what she does. They're extremely hard to detect. They're hard to define. And you might not be able to find one around there in Lake Apopka, but you could go out and take a water sample and then, run the sample, look for the environmental DNA in there and be able to say, hey, yeah, we're not getting python hits, or we do get a hit. And then maybe someone like Donna comes up and looks and try to remove them. So lots of different ways of doing it, but the cheapest and most effective is prevention.
Absolutely. The eDNA field is very exciting, but as you said, the low tech, don't let them out there. That's the most effective.
Yeah, the eDNA, there was a study back in 2016, and basically they did find hits in Loxahatchee, in Lake Loxahatchee. And actually there's only been 2 pythons found from contractors since. And there's only been 1 or 2 fishermen or whatnot that have found them. So, they've been around for a long time, and we just can't get to them. We can't find them. So it is good to know that they're there, because we didn't, I'm not sure exactly how many years we've started. I think it's only been 1 or 2 years now that we've started hunting that area. So hopefully we will be able to get the ones that are out of there. So, it's good to know where they are so we can get them. And the telemetry programs are fantastic. We're learning so much about their habitats with egg bearing and where they're at. And we've found so many more nests now that we've had these telemetried snakes that we can go and research. All the research is being done, and it's getting back to us contractors. So boots on the ground, we're the boots on the ground. We have to get out there, but we need the knowledge to know where to go, because it's such a vast area. So, science is extremely important in this. And then, the boots on the ground is also, you need the follow up. So, and I don't know if you want to talk about the rabbits, the robo rabbits, but that's the newest craze. And, it's great technology, the AI learning on, making sure that it is a python and not a indigo snake or whatever, right? But still, you need boots on the ground to get over there quickly and go and get that python. So it's a team effort, and proud to be on it.
Absolutely. And if there's audience members out there who have questions or want to know how to get more involved, please drop them into the comments. Speaking of our audience members, is there anything that the public maybe misunderstands about invasive species or the work to manage them that you want to touch on or debunk here?
I mean, just quickly, these aren't pets anymore, the Burmese pythons. A lot of people think that they're pets, that they're still being released. They're not. These are Burmese pythons that have been in the Everglades for 13, 14, 15 generations. So don't think that we're out there, euthanizing pets. We're not. We're removing an invasive species that is no longer a pet. Sorry to interrupt you, Steve, but I just want to get that out.
I think that's a great misconception. So I think that's exactly what we were asking about. Steve, is there anything that maybe the public misunderstands?
I kind of follow up on that, when these pythons are removed, they're not going to a zoo or somewhere. They're getting euthanized. When I'm advocating people remove Cuban tree frogs in their yard, I'm advocating people humanely euthanize them. Neither Donna or I enjoy having people do that or doing the killing, so to speak, but we're doing it because we're being advocates, and we're asking people by doing doing your part to be an advocate for our native wildlife, and I think that's really important for people to know. Also, I don't know people realize the financial impact of invasive species. And again, now we're just not talking Cuban tree frogs and pythons. We're talking, invasive species of termites, ants, rodent pests. there's a paper, it's dated now, and I'm sure this estimate is higher, but it's somewhere around 1.2, $1.3 billion a year costs are incurred or caused, by invasive species, and that is borne on the taxpayer. We ultimately pay for that. So that's the cost of, of removal, the cost of damages. There's also, it's not as a big, huge part of it, but there is money spent on research. But as Don was pointing out, the more we know about the biology of particular species, the better we are able to manage it. So it seems like, science and educations of higher learning are getting a bad rap lately. But we're doing good work here, and we're committed to what we do. I have colleagues that work for the state that do, they're very committed to wildlife conservation. They don't get paid very much for the work that they do. So we're not all out here, living on the taxpayer dollar. We are working hard. We're doing good work, and we're trying to make a positive difference for the environment, and that ultimately has a positive, impact on people. Because if we all rely on the natural environment, I mean, we want clean air, we want clean water, we want natural areas. And so scientists in general work to, in our field, work to try to protect those kind of things. So, yeah, the cost is a huge one that people might not be aware of. That it's a staggering amount of money, and that's in the U.S., but it's the same in other countries. I've seen the publications on it. It's a very large amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make such a good point that funding for scientific research is such an important part of that and has brought us to where we are today. So speaking of that, are there success stories where management efforts have made a real difference? Like what have we actually been able to contain maybe, or not let go out of control, to use your wildfire example?
Steve, do you know about the giant snails?
A little bit, the giant African snails.
Yeah, I don't know much about them, but I think they've been contained.
I think they've been introduced more than once, but they were, were detected, and then those populations eradicated. They were removed. I know in the literature there's some, examples of on, small oceanic islands where non-native rodents have gotten. There's been some success stories there, I think, at eradicating. Also, goats. Goats can be a bad invasive species in places. And then, like, Donna said, I was very heartened to hear that, hey, you're seeing some, firsthand, some positive impact of python removal. Never going to get rid of them all, right? Same thing with Cuban tree frogs. Never going to get rid of them all. However, there's the science to show if you remove them enough in a particular area, you can see benefits for the native frogs. Also, I'll point out there's a federal law called the Lacey Act, and it's two things. One is it prohibits interstate transfer of game, I think, that are harvested illegally. But another thing it allowed the federal government to list certain species as what's called an injurious wildlife. And since that Lacey Act in the Fish and Wildlife Service has really used it, there's been a lot of a lot of prevention has gone on from there. For example, there's a fungus that impacts amphibian populations globally. There was one that was very lot in the news that affected frogs. Just goes by the initials BD. Well, it turns out that salamanders get a very similar disease, and it was showing up in salamanders in Europe. And the southeastern U.S., or we have a lot of them, but really the Appalachian Mountains, you think Tennessee, the Great Smoky Mountains, Western North Carolina, and, the Appalachians is a long range. That is a global center of diversity for salamanders, the family Plethodonidae. And if a disease was to get in there, it could have a major impact on global biodiversity of salamanders. Well, that Lacey Act was used to prevent animals from being imported from Europe, and likely prevented, or has very much slowed down the, sadly, maybe eventual arrival of this fungus. So there's where laws really work. That is a success story. It's not that something was here and we got rid of it. Again, we stopped it from getting here to begin with, and that's a huge accomplishment. And again, people working for the federal government, civil servants, are the ones that do this. They're doing good work, and they need our support rather than than the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I am a big fan of using policy to prevent negative outcomes like that. So that is a great one. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I appreciate all of those folks in the federal service that are working to make sure that our imperiled species are not facing even more threats than they already are.
Or not working right now. Sorry. Because of the furlough.
That's right.
Yeah.
So how do we balance the need to control invasive species populations while respecting the fact that these animals are just responding to their environment, right? They are doing what animals do and passing their genes into the next generation. So how do we balance those that need to control these? And we've talked over and over again about prevention. I feel like that's where this is going to go, but it's worth it to make sure our audience knows that.
Well, I can tell you, I know a lot of the 100 contractors, and every single one that I know is an environmentalist first and python hunter next. Most of us love snakes. I think that's why we got into this. So we're treating these snakes with the utmost respect that they deserve. And it's crazy to say, we kind of love these things, and we hate what we have to do to at the end of the day. But we know that every single python that we remove from the environment, we're saving several hundred, if not thousands, of lives of native animals that belong there. So it's a hard choice that people, that we all have to make to do what we're doing. But it makes it a little easier to realize that we are making a difference out there. Again, we love these things, so we're going to treat them with great respect. That's it.
And I'll just add, I know it's not the fault of the invasive species. It's not the Cuban tree frog's fault it's here. It's not the Burmese python's fault it's here. Humans are the ultimate source of these introductions. And I'll just say that we all need to be better stewards of the natural world.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. And that's why we're here, right? Spreading that message. So, what is the role that this audience that's watching out here and the public can play in either helping, control invasives or preventing those, or unintentionally making the problem worse? And we've talked about responsible pet ownership, both in not releasing animals that aren't supposed to be there, but also like having your own, maybe your cats not explore the outside. Is there anything else that you want to add for our audience?
Learn more about the issues here. If you're thinking about going out and looking for pythons, learn all you can, and that you're not allowed to transport them anywhere. So as soon as you find one, you do have to euthanize them. So learn the proper way of euthanizing them, so that you're not causing them harm. It's a crazy thing to say. You're euthanizing the thing, but you don't want to hurt it. So make sure that euthanization process is not causing it harm. And Steve, we talked earlier about our yards and putting native species in and trying to keep the invasive species out of our yards. We don't have to go out to the Everglades. You can do it right in your backyard. So go ahead, continue with that.
I'll just echo your comments. Responsible pet ownership, removing invasive species. I mean, anyone can remove, even if you're like, oh, I can't touch a frog or kill it. I understand that. You can remove an invasive plant, but you have to know what you're doing. You have to learn, what plant is this? iNaturals can help with that, by the way. Yeah. Remove those plants. Support legislation, or write, your representatives and say, hey, I learned about invasive species. It costs us a lot. What can, I'm asking you to do more. And then if you have that pet that's your, that exotic pet, and then we're not talking a dog or a cat or a rabbit, but if you have a lizard or a snake or a Bengal tiger and living in your, spare room, and you're like, I really need to get rid of this thing. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has their pet amnesty program. You can contact them. You can find that online. They will take your pet, no questions asked. That's the amnesty part. And they will put it with an adoptive home, people who are pre-approved. They don't euthanize them. They put them in homes with people that can care for them. And that's a much, much better and legal choice as compared to just, releasing it. It's learn more and be responsible pet owner and support the legislation.
And if you do see something like you said earlier, Steve, if you do see something that seems to be out of the ordinary or doesn't belong, contact the I've got one and your local officials to let them know. I mean, it's important to know where these things are showing up, you
Yeah,
know.
and that's really important for people in Central and more North Florida, where a lot of these species haven't gotten yet, but they might ultimately be moving to, you
Yeah.
know. So, but yeah, reporting, that's definitely another thing to add. So,
And there are, like, for instance, iguanas. We didn't touch on the iguanas. There's a lot of companies that will do that. I have iguanas in my backyard, and I'm going to probably have to call in a specialist to come and get them, because I don't want to go shooting a BB gun in my backyard, right? So, you know, when it's important and you can't do it yourself, you know, contact a professional to do it as well.
and it's sad that we have these businesses that now will provide these services. Same thing with cane toads in places, or the bufo
Yes.
toad, you know.
Yes.
People who will basically, it's like they're, you know, you have someone taking care of your yard. They will come and do management around your yard. And I would say, if you have a pet dog that you walk or keep outside and you live in the range of that cane, aka bufo toad, you need to be aware of that thing. It can
Absolutely.
be lethal. It can be lethal to your pet that attacks it, or certainly if it swallows it. So, you know, becoming, you know, better educated in telling your neighbors, you know, if you see someone that, let's say you're in South Florida, oh, the neighbor just moved in from wherever, you know, I see they had a dog. They need to know about this cane toad, particularly if, like, they're in Naples or Miami, because you could save their pets. You could save their pet's life.
Yep. Yep.
Absolutely. Great resources. We talked a little bit about iNaturalist earlier too, and I really feel like that's a great one, because whether you're finding an invasive or a native species, it adds to this community science project. So make sure you're using apps like that to track what you're seeing out there in the environment. So we do have some time, a little bit of time for some questions. This one is coming in. How quickly can an invasive species start to disrupt an ecosystem? And do we know that? Since we don't have a good idea of the first moment they make it into that environment.
I'd say that's a tough question to answer. A pattern that often is repeated is that as something gets introduced and it goes through a lag phase, which just means it's there, it's maybe, you know, not even detected if it's sort of low numbers, and then whatever reason it just sort of starts to explode and expand. So really, when things start to, you know, expand and move out of that area where they were first introduced, but, you know, it's going to depend, you know, if it's a long-lived animal and there's just one, it could be out there for many years till it had a mate. So things can take a while to, you know, to see effects. And there's a lot of these species out there. We just don't, you know, I would say we'll call them introduced right now, because we don't know what impacts they're having, or maybe they're having impacts, but they're just subtle, and we haven't really teased apart those really subtle impacts. But it sounds like an easy question to answer, but it's not really. I can't really answer that. I mean, Donna could probably talk about the history of pythons, and that'd be one sort of case study about from when we thought they got there to now, you know, and it's decades with them, I believe.
Yeah, well, I mean, when it says when can an invasive species start to disrupt an ecosystem, as soon as it's introduced into the system, you know. Yeah. And unfortunately, we didn't know that there was a problem. My gosh, I think I started hearing about it in like 1998, maybe, and maybe a little bit earlier than that. And you know, you just hear these little stories that, oh my gosh, there's no animals left in the Everglades, and people didn't believe that it was pythons. There were some scientists that said, hey, you know, we've got a problem. There are no animals left. And we found this one python back in 1978, right? That was the first one that they found. And that was, by the way, Hurricane Andrew was 1992. So unless pythons can time travel, they've been here. They've been here since 1978 when the pet trade started importing 200,000 of them a year. But they were transported throughout the United States, right? And put into pet stores. And, you know, if you have one up in Michigan and it gets out of your cage or whatnot, it dies in the winter. Down here, they didn't. So it wasn't just Hurricane Andrew and, you know, the devastation that caused. And there were several breeding facilities down there. People were, at that point in 1992, people were breeding them just like they breed in ball pythons now in their spare bedroom to make extra cash. They were doing that, you know, back then. They were doing that with Burmese pythons, and they got away from not only, you know, a breeding facility, but breeders that were doing it in their yards, because Hurricane Andrew came through and just blew everything away. And that did introduce many pythons. But prior to that, they were already becoming established in areas that we didn't even realize. So the disrupting of the ecosystem is happening way before we know about it. when it comes to invasive species as opposed to introduced species. And
that's a really good point, because yeah, that one Burmese python by itself introduced, as soon as it starts eating a native animal, there's the impact, you know.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it depends, I guess, what you find is disruption. But yeah, I guess it can start straight away. But often the sort of noticeable impacts that we pick up, you know, and we start to wrap our head around sometimes can take a while. So it's also a reason, if you just see something that's there, oh, it looks like it's innocuous, it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
I don't think that's good justification to wait to take action. We ought to, you know, presume guilt ahead of time, you know.
Sure.
Guilty until proven innocent with these introduced species, I think, is the policy we should probably adopt.
Right. If it doesn't belong, let's get it out of there.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like so many of our conservation and environmental issues, sometimes it's not until we see those tipping points that we really recognize that there's a massive problem, and it can be really hard to manage it at that point. So really, really good points there. You'll enjoy this one. Steve, Karen Meyer on YouTube wants to know how we can tell whether a frog is a Cuban tree frog or one of our native tree frogs.
That is a whole topic in and of itself. We could spend an hour on that. The issue is that Cuban tree frogs are so variable in color and pattern. However, Cuban tree frogs have warts on their back, distinct warts of various different sizes. They have large bug eyes. They also have really large toe pads that at the tips of their toes. And then if you had one in hand, you would notice that the skin is fused to the top of the skull and it won't move around. Problem is they vary so much. So that's one up there. That's a native green tree frog, and that's pretty distinctive because it's got that clean line down the side. However, juvenile Cuban tree frogs have a nice clean line down their side, but it doesn't start at their lip. It starts at their eye. So it's almost, I'd say, if you're uncertain, you know, track me down and send me pictures. And then, oh my gosh, I have a note literally right here. Here you go. On tree frog identification, I need to write a whole entire document on it because I get this question a lot, and I wish that was available. But my website does have pictures on, you know, how to compare one to the other. But yeah, just email me and I can help you with it. Also, if you join that Florida Frogs and Toads Facebook page, there's some really, really great resources there. Some people are experts and they can help you. You have to ask. They often will say, oh, that's such and such. You need to follow up. And why is that such and such? You know, because something like a native barking tree frog, you might think it has warts, but really it sort of has a granular look to it. So that's a tough question to answer. But yeah, I got to write that dang that outreach publication that I could say, hey, see this link. You know, that's where I need to be. So yeah, I need to do that. The guilt is back.
I will say,
thank you for the question. It's challenging, you know.
As a non-expert, I really heavily lean on those expert groups, like on Facebook for identification. So yes, yeah. And Steve, thank you so much for being a resource to all of our audience members. At the end, we will give everyone a chance to have a way to reach out to both Donna and Steve.
Yeah. And I've got a publication called The Cuban Tree Frog in Florida, and that gives a bunch of ID tips. It doesn't include a whole bunch of pictures of natives, but that's a good place to start. You can Google online, Cuban tree frog in Florida, and you'll find it.
Let me just add quickly with the Burmese python, if it's larger than you, it's most likely a Burmese python. But they do start out at like 18 inches, and they can be mistaken for other snakes, and some of our native snakes are venomous. And I know of 2 people this year that did pick up a snake that they thought was a Burmese python, and it was a cottonmouth, and they spent 3 days in the hospital with very large medical bills to go with that. So you have to know, you know, in the Burmese python case, it's dangerous. With the tree frogs, you definitely don't want to kill a native tree frog because we hardly have any left, right? So you have to be extremely careful as to which ones you're going to remove and euthanize.
And that's another good point with the cane toad or bufo toad and southern toads. They look very similar. I also have an outreach publication on them that can really help. But yeah, you want to be sure you're removing and euthanizing the invasive species and not inadvertently by accident the native animals.
Yeah.
We have time for one last quick question. This is from Matthew on Facebook. And Matthew says, I teach a non-majors environmental science course and my students are watching. So happy that they're watching. what would be one thing that you would want them to take away about invasive species in Florida where they live?
Oof.
First, just thank you for teaching this course, Matthew. We
Yes.
so appreciate our teachers, and thanks for having your students watch our live stream. That's awesome.
Matthew, I would say yes, and good job being educated. I would say there's probably a heck of a lot more of them out there than they realize, you know. And if they're from South Central and South Florida, they've probably grown up with animals in their environment that they associate with possibly being native that are not, that have been introduced. So I think that probably the biggest thing is that the magnitude of the problem is larger than they think in Florida, and it's not just Florida specific. It's a global conservation issue.
Yeah. And there's, just think about lizards here in South Florida, though. How many I think there's 27 different types of lizards that don't belong, but are we going to remove all of them? No. Should we even try? Not sure. But they do have impacts, the agamas, they are butterfly eaters, and we have the Florida blue that's so rare that this could be the death knell to the Florida blue butterfly because of the agamas that are expanding their range. But we're talking to students. Learn what you can. Learn everything you can. Don't stop at Burmese pythons or agamas or frogs or lizards. There's so many plants and birds and fish, and there's so much work to be done. And just one thing I want to get out there is, yes, you are the next generation. We need you to get out there and help our environment. But if anybody out there that's our age, don't sit back and wait for the next generation. We can do stuff. We can do stuff. Everything from in our yard, picking up balloons that are out in the water in the Everglades. It saves lives. Just picking up trash can actually save lives of the animals that are out there. So everybody needs to get involved and help out. There's plenty to be done.
That's such a great message. There's a role for everyone, whether you like to catch snakes or whether you're interested in policy or communicating or teaching. There's literally a path for everyone. So thank you all. Unfortunately, we're at time and we do need to wrap up. This has been just an incredible conversation. I want to thank both of our panelists so much for being with us tonight. And I just want everyone to know that they can, as they've said, please engage with their work. Please reach out if you have questions on species identification. We're going to put up either in the comments or under the screen, we're going to put some ways that you can reach Steve and Donna to keep up with their work. And we'll also be sharing those in the comments here. For the Florida Wildlife Federation, we certainly appreciate you tuning in to our live stream tonight. If you have not connected with us previously, please make sure you sign up for our monthly newsletter. It is absolutely the best way to stay updated. And we will let you know when we have more live streams, our next live streams up. And we'll also let you know how you can take action on some of those things that both Donna and Steve mentioned tonight. So we often engage in policy, and as Steve said, that's a great way to prevent these things from happening. So please stay in touch with us. On behalf of the Florida Wildlife Federation, thank you so much again to the panelists, everyone who's tuned in tonight. Thank you so much to our team who's working behind the scenes on this live stream. And as we leave you tonight, we just encourage you to stay engaged on these issues and find that role that you can play, and please stay involved. So thank you so much.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
All right, bye.